Your first one, please.
Well, the house that we grew up in had a really big backyard for a suburban backyard. And I remember what it was like. My dad started work really early in the morning, so he'd get home at about sort of 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we'd be sitting out on the back steps in the backyard, sitting on warm concrete. And my parents would just be getting fruit off the fruit trees in the backyard. There was a beautiful fig tree and a white peach tree, and or strawberries in summer, sitting there eating fruit warm from the garden in summer with my parents just kind of calmly talking about their day. It just felt so safe, and like there's nothing like fruit fresh from a tree or tomatoes fresh from the garden, and just being able to wander around and pick things off the tree. It's just such a fantastic experience. And my earliest memories were that sitting there with my parents in the backyard eating the fruit, or helping my mum in the kitchen. My mum is an amazing cook, but she used to make apple strudel at least once a week by hand. She'd make the
What was your mum's name?
Rose,
Rose.
yeah.
And how would she say strudel? What was it?
Strudel.
Can you
Strudel. Or in fact, in Slovenian, you normally say strukli or zavitek. But anyway, strudel is the kind of Austrian name for a dish that's pretty common throughout the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So we'll stick with strudel. And she'd make the pastry. She'd grate the apples by hand, and before she grated them, she'd peel the skin off in one long snake. And it was my, job as a kid to be sitting there in the kitchen watching her trying to eat the snake of the apple skin. And I'd get to drink the juice after she'd grated the apples before she used it in the strudel. And I could watch her cook for hours. I still love actually being with her when she's cooking, although she tells me not to talk to her sometimes because that's too distracting.
Your first and second food memory sort of combine a little then. The first being making strudel with your mother, and the second one about picking the fruit trees in the backyard, the warm concrete. Let's talk more about that one. What was the relationship like between your parents and you? What was your father like?
They were beautiful parents. They're just fantastic. Sadly, I lost my dad about 10 years ago. He died of prostate cancer. But I've still got mum, and she'll be 90 soon. Look, it was just a really lovely childhood. They were quite strict parents. Like, they didn't let us get away with anything, but very loving. Like, we never doubted that we were loved. What did they talk about? I mean, my dad worked at least 6 days a week.
What did he do?
7 days. He's a plumber. So he worked most of my childhood. He worked for Qantas. He worked for Qantas for more than 20 years on the jet base at Mascot. And mum's last job before she had my oldest brother Ray was working in a shoe factory. She'd worked in a domestic housekeeping role before that. She'd worked in a kindergarten as a kindergarten assistant back in Slovenia. But I suppose one of the things that was lovely to observe as a child was, though they had in an outsider looking in might think that's quite a traditional relationship. He goes off to work, she stays home and looks after the family, but they had an incredibly equal relationship. Like, they wouldn't make big decisions without talking it through with each other. My dad would bring home his pay packet and he'd just hand it over to my mum. We only had one car. My mum didn't drive. So he'd stop at the fruit shop on the way home and stock up on all the heavy stuff so she wouldn't have to get the potatoes and the pumpkins and stuff during the week. And he'd buy a little packet of wafer biscuits, one for each of the kids, and that was our sort of treat for the week. And then, once he'd done the fruit and vegetable shopping, he'd take out a bit of petrol money and he'd hand the rest of the pay packet over to my mum. And it was her job to look after the family, feed the kids, pay the mortgage. And she would go to our nearest shopping centre in Janelli, catch the bus, do the shopping for the week, and then put every other cent into the mortgage. We'd actually walk home with the shopping because we wouldn't spend the 40 cents on the bus fare.
Bus.
So that they could pay their house off as quickly as they could. I think growing up in very uncertain circumstances meant that sort of security was super important to them. And so they're a very equal relationship, a very loving relationship. I think that's so beautiful for kids to see that their parents like each other. You know, when we'd walk to church on a Sunday morning, Mum and Dad would be walking up ahead holding hands, and we'd be kind of tailing along behind. So even after, however many years of marriage, in fact, when my dad, because he was the leading hand, the plumber on the jet base, if something went wrong, for example, with the kitchens in the catering section on the weekends, he'd get called in to fix it up. And Mum would just go in for the ride, and she'd take a book or a magazine, and she'd just sit in the car and wait for him to come out, just so he had company on the ride in and the ride home. Not as a sort of sacrifice, but because she enjoyed his company. Yeah, I just feel super lucky that I was able to see that example of a relationship growing up.
Final memory, Tanya. This is one of my favorites.
Well, we were really lucky that my dad worked for Qantas, because it meant that we could go to Slovenia every few years and see our family over there, because we didn't really have any extended family in Australia. And around the 1st of May every year, every little village has a party, a veselica. And it's so fantastic because everybody gets together, they'll be singing and dancing, all the local musicians will be playing together, they're singing all sorts of traditional songs. Polka is probably the most popular dance at these things. So there's a lot of people, being thrown around the dance floor, and the food is amazing. So there'd usually be a big wood-fired oven, and people would be making bread, prekmurska gibanica, which is this incredible layered cake with flaky pastry and layers of apple, ricotta, poppy seed, walnut, and big long tables, homemade wine, homemade salami, homemade bread, homemade cheese, plates of tomato. The parties like that could go on, if it was a wedding or something, it could go on for 2 or 3 days. And everyone would get in together, everyone would cook together, and just the joy in one another's company. And as a kid, like, the adults are all having a great time together, it was actually quite unusual for me to see my parents relax. So always working. I never sat down and relaxed, but here they'd be relaxed, drinking, chatting, laughing, eating, and us kids would be sort of running around, quite wild but perfectly safe. They're beautiful memories.